Thank you all for joining tonight, for coming to this talk. The title is The Heart of Boundlessness, Bringing Prajnaparamita Home. And the sense there is, as we kind of conclude this foray into Prajnaparamita Sutra, before we go into the practice period. So first, I'd like to thank Roshi Joan, who's now on the East Coast, for allowing this kind of harebrained scheme of giving talks on these ancient texts, and also grateful for my fellow speakers who joined in this exploration for the last 6 weeks. It's been a real joy for us, for me especially, and for us, and hopefully for some of you. And as we conclude tonight and move on to the next thing, I'd also love to hear feedback. If you have any ideas about how it went or how it could improve or what we might do next, we'd love to hear them. You can write us on our email. But we're not done yet. So one more chance to speak the unspeakable. So tomorrow we begin the practice period. And I think many of you are here for the practice period. Besides, okay, a couple. I think some people arrived today. And it will be on living in the embrace of the bodhisattvas. And so while we leave the study of the Prajnaparamita sutras behind, we'll be really studying the spirit of the bodhisattvas. Are you having trouble hearing in the back? Would you like, we have these audio, Manny, maybe you can find our audio assistance devices. Thanks. So what's really alive for me tonight, what's been coming up is this phrase from Maezumi Roshi you probably heard, appreciate your life. So kind of ordinary in a way. His whole book is called Appreciate Your Life, but the first chapter is on that. And it really only comes up at the end of that chapter, which I'll quote in a second. But it's interesting that the reading of these texts is so different from our ordinary mode of consumption of media. It's very slow and kind of sometimes can be arduous. There's got to, you have to look things up, and it doesn't kind of, it's the opposite of scrolling, right? Mm-hmm. It's just like, it's like slow scroll. And so it makes you stop, it makes you pause, it makes you kind of pay attention. I'm addicted to multitasking, as some of you know, and as many of us are. And I loved that it made me stop that. You can't read Prajnaparamita and be kind of listening to the radio or whatever. Even listening to, lo-fi girl study music is hard to try and read Prajnaparamita. It just has to be silent. And so I think it's helped me a little bit in trying to kind of slow down, and because it really asks for our full attention, as our practice does, as our meditation practice does. And so I've appreciated that. And that's actually given me this sense of the importance of just giving that attention to everything. And you kind of think, well, isn't that what we do here as residents? Like, that's the point, right? Yeah. Thank you, Kodo, for telling us, preaching to the choir. But, it's really, I think it's bears saying again, it's like there's something so powerful in giving our full attention to something. And it's really the opposite of what we're constantly being pulled at in kind of ordinary life. Just pulled to the next thing, multitasking, screen scrolling, kind of the techno-capitalist notion that I've been exploring with Skyla and her screen time and all this, my 3-year-old daughter, in past talks. And so this really gave me another kind of sparkle of hope of like, yeah, this really is the way. And it's really the opposite of where culture is going. And it's hard. It's, just like any practice that's worth doing. You get to the end of your long day of work and emails and problems, and it's 5:30, 6 o'clock. Do you really want to open the Prajnaparamita Sutra and read and study? No. No part of you wants to do that, right? But maybe is actually a part of you that wants to, if what might happen. And so that's the thing that, and I can't say that I was just reading the Prajnaparamita Sutras for fun by myself before studying for this. Like, you need some impetus, you need some kind of, maybe a group or a study group or something, or say you're going to give a talk, or make other people force you to give talks. It helps, right? It's like, okay, now I'm going to study, and then you get to taste the fruit of that, of spending that evening time doing something like this. Shinzan, auspicious moment. So yes, I've just been so grateful to have gotten to kind of settle into some of the sutras, and of course, we've barely touched the surface, right? But this sense of kind of slowing down and enjoying moments, I think, has come from this exploration. And so whether it's appreciating the sunrise as you drive here in the morning, if you're sitting, or this morning I came down the driveway and there were like 10 deer in the field, and I'm often not early. And so I don't get to stop and enjoy the deer. But today I was actually on time, relatively speaking. And so I stopped and looked at the deer, and it was a sweet moment. And I felt that kind of call of the kind of slow movement of Prajnaparamita in the background, always humming, always there to be perceived, if we would just stop and allow it to enter us. I was with my dad on Monday. It's his birthday today. Happy birthday, Dad. Thank you for being born. Wouldn't be here without you. And we went to the botanical garden in Albuquerque, the biopark. It's beautiful right now. The fruit blossoms are all coming out. And that's what he wanted to do for his birthday. And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So we went out, we had a picnic. And we were at the pond. There's this beautiful pond with these different kinds of ducks and all of the beautiful plants and flowers around it. And we were just sitting there, kind of watching, taking in the sight. And I asked him, in your kind of spiritual practice, how do you take in a beautiful impression like this? How do you really appreciate it? What do you do with this? And he said, I breathe it in. You just breathe in the moment. And that really struck me, because on the one hand, it's so kind of, well, yeah, we do that all the time, right? But to actually make it a practice of, like, when you see something beautiful that you'd like to be present for, we kind of do that naturally, but that is an actual, like, you can take that breath. And then it ties, of course, to our practice of breathing, and as Wendy Johnson calls it, the breathing room of the Zendo, where we're practicing this moment by moment, breathing in. And that every breath in the Zendo can be a moment of appreciation. It's like, why are we there? Are we trying to achieve some higher state? Are we trying to be a better person? Or we're just not trying to do anything? Or maybe we can be there to appreciate our life, and just feel that sense of gratitude for being and for breathing. And so that was a beautiful moment with my dad. So happy birthday, Dad, and thank you. And it felt like another kind of piece of what are we getting at with these texts? They're so kind of philosophical. They're so they're using such a sharp sword of cutting through, not this, not this, not this, not this concept, not that concept. And you keep coming to, well, there's nothing to hold on to. Well, then what? Then what? It's not this, it's not that, then what? And that's the moment to breathe, I think. To breathe in that sense, that feeling of, then what? Can we feel it? Can we be present? Maezumi Roshi says in that chapter, we do not see that our life right here, right now, is nirvana, is awakening. Maybe you think that nirvana is a place where there are no problems, no more delusions. Maybe we think nirvana is something very beautiful, something unattainable. We always think that nirvana is something very different from our own life. Well, we must really understand that nirvana, awakening, Buddhahood is right here, right now. I encourage you, he says, please enjoy this wonderful life together. Appreciate the world of just this. There is nothing extra. Genuinely appreciate your life as the most precious treasure and take good care of it. It's such a beautiful pointer because it's really reminding us that, and it's so easy to makes another of Prajnaparamita, for instance, or of emptiness, or of any of these kind of concepts. And yet all of this, not that, is bringing us back to right here, right now. It is here. We are coursing in prajna right now. Breathe it in. It's there with every breath. And yes, you are doing it anyway. You're in prajna anyway. But if you're not noticing it, then it's not helping you. So the invitation is to stop doing the other things, to allow the pulls of our modern society to just come off us like Teflon and remain still and let it happen and feel it. This way of practice or this study of these ancient texts maybe can feel like, what does this have to do with our lives? And I think that in this series of talks, every speaker has tried to speak to that. Why is this important? What does this have to do with what we're doing here, with the problems in our world? There's so much going on. And I'm not going to repeat everything that everyone said, but just that from my perspective, this kind of practice is, interestingly enough, an act of radical dissidence, what is the word? Counter cultural movement. When you're reading Prajnaparamita and you're not watching whatever it is on TV, you're not channel surfing. Do people still channel surf? Is that a thing? Or is now it's scrolling, right? We're just like, in the old days when I was young, we channel surfed. No, nowadays it's like preview surfing. Does anybody do that? When you're just like, I'm too tired to watch a whole movie. Let me watch some previews, and you just can't decide on anything. Okay, TMI. But so instead of doing that, whatever it is, whatever your thing is, when you're tired and you don't want to do, something else, it's not just like, oh, I'm going to study the Dharma so I can be a better practitioner or something. It's like, no, this is actually the sowing the seeds for what might become peace in our lives, a peace that can't be touched by that culture that we're all a part of too, but that's always, grasping at our attention. And so it's not to be not informed. I think we should be informed. We should know what's going on, but just to recognize that every time we're taking in information from the outside, what's their agenda? They have to support themselves. It's part of the capitalist economy. So they're going to be providing ads. They're going to be serving you up something to make you want something else. So whenever you're engaged in, media consumption, you're also engaged in the companies figuring out how they can harvest and use your attention to make money through your purchasing power. I mean, it's kind of gives you the heebie-jeebies, right? And I don't know that there's any way not to do that. If we want to stay informed, we're going to be exposing ourselves to that. But just to recognize that, we don't have to do that all the time. Like, you think after a long day of work, after looking at your screen, you're going to go home and then you're going to spend another 6 hours looking at a screen of one sort or another. And it's like, I'm so tired, I can't do anything useful. This is like my own process. I'm not, but when there's some other kind of other force that can come in and help us, whether it's like an agreement with a friend, it's like, let's do something that is different than that. Let's do something other. At Upaya, we sit at 5:30. They sit at 5:30. I'm not there, but in my heart. And that's beautiful. What an act of transgression, like occupy silence. I think it's really cool, actually. So, and then you might think, oh, well, if I'm reading the sutras, I'm just going to fall asleep. I'm just too tired. The only thing way I'm going to stay awake till bedtime is by stimulating myself with screen, right? It's like, if you're that tired, go to sleep. You're sleep deprived. We're all just chronically sleep deprived because we're chronically stimulated, or we're continuously stimulated by these things that are activating parts of our brain that keep us up. And it's been, I've shared a little bit about this. It's been kind of because I'm subject to this, of course, more deeply than I wish. And I see it in my daughter that it's like that kind of stimulation keeps her up. And so it's, how do you balance that out? It's like, if I don't want her to have a screen at night, why should I, why am I allowing myself to do that? So read the text that'll make you fall asleep, go to sleep, enjoy. And then at other times, maybe you're reading it and it actually speaks to you. And this is where it's so cool, because it might feel difficult at first. It's definitely like to get over that hump of like, okay, I'm reading this and what is this saying? And because we're so used to reading things quickly, right? I'm gonna read 10 pages and then I'm gonna go to bed. You can't do that with Prajnaparamita or other sutras like that. It takes your full attention very slowly, and that's okay. Because if you read through the whole thing, it's not like you're gonna get more of it. There's only less. You only get less and less as you go, which is a good thing. And so, and then in there, and what's been so wonderful in these couple months in studying this, there are pieces that begin to speak to you, little phrases, or maybe part of the poem or something at the end, or an incident that could be like a koan, like a case, that just stay with you. And then you start to see them also, these pieces outside in daily life and in other things you've read and heard, and it creates this weave of interconnection with the other things that, I'll just speak for myself, that I feel are important. And so instead of spending an evening finishing the evening and feeling like, well, I just, wasted my time or something like that, or I didn't really get anything out of it. In fact, I'm more tired. You feel good at the end, right? You feel like, I spent my time well, and then the fruits of that become part of my life. And so that's why I think it's just a marvelous practice. And I'm not sure how to do this in a way to share more of that, because you kind of have to do it, right? Like, I can talk all day about how wonderful it is to read the sutras, and it would be interesting to just read together very slowly, but that's a different sort of thing. But it sounds like a long advertisement for Prajnaparamita, so I'm sorry. But I just wanted to share why I'm so grateful. for the time we've spent on it. So to look, to look, yeah, I did exactly what we told you not to do. Too long of an intro. But this is, I think, the important part. I just want to look at a little bit of where we've come these last 6 weeks. So I began with a short introduction to the Prajnaparamita texts, the 8,000 line version, which is the earliest version that we know of from like 100 AD or BCE. And I dared to attempt a metaphorical explanation of shunyata, boundlessness, emptiness, using the rainbow spectrum, and how that trying to see the world like this with by softening our rigid lines could help us and be not just in our own lives a key to peace, but also perhaps even in the world. And Senko gave the first part of a kind of two-part talk on his way-seeking mind path and how Prajnaparamita really spoke to you through the journey, and which brought you through hell and brought you here. And so we're so grateful for that. And in the next talk, Sensei Monshin shared this incredible story of Harry Roberts, who grew up with the Yurok Indians and learned their ethic that one's real self and purpose in life is a manifestation of the indescribable. It's amazing. One's real self and purpose in life is a manifestation of the indescribable. And she connected this to this teachings of emptiness and showed then how that connection leads to compassion. And the two wings of the bird, wisdom and compassion. I mean, each of these talks has been just such a beautiful dive into not just a little bit of the text, but into our whole life. I love this quote from Monshin. There's nothing more encouraging and uplifting than this Prajnaparamita teaching, because it means that everything I do, every relationship I engage in, permeates through space and time. And this is a really deep motivation for not giving up and for living by vow. So good, thank you. Then Sensei Dainin came and introduced us to the Diamond Sutra, the spin cycle for the logical mind. And in exploring that, the Diamond Sutra's method of anti-logic. This is not this, therefore it is called this, over and over again with these different concepts, which, you think it's like, is it just A is A, therefore it is not A. Oh, it's just an equation and we don't need to think about it. It can be tempting to kind of go there, but to actually think about each concept and sit with it and say, well, how is this a concept, basically? And how is this as a concept, therefore not what it actually is? And you do that process, and that's the spin cycle. It can work on you. And then she spoke more on how this approach influenced Dogen's writings and koans, and really brought us to the power of engaging wholeheartedly in ordinary activities, and how the Bodhisattva way is grounded in this kind of deep sense of humanness, just going and begging for food, or going to the dining hall and getting your food from the kitchen. Then Senko continued our exploration of the Diamond Sutra, reading with us the opening paragraphs, which was a beautiful way to enter into that, and then proceeded to talk about the emptiness of self and self-concept, and how self-concept can even ruin your pitas if you're making pitas in the oven. How many people were there? maybe inside joke, I guess. Anyway, great story about self-concept. And then finally, last week, Sensei Fushun introduced us to this incredible sister text of the Diamond Sutra called the Empty Bowl Sutra. This is actually both texts. And he told about a little of the history and how they're both part of the story is kind of like one day in the life of the Buddha. And that's really what I wanted to talk about tonight, as I'm running out of time, to sort of tell more about the story, because there's a lot of philosophical conversation in it, and it's really, I mean, it's, what is it, like eight eight or 10 pages in here, so small pages. It takes maybe 20 or 30 minutes to read if you're reading regularly. If you read slowly, maybe longer. But it's so cool. It's like such a great story. In addition to the conversation, it reminds me a lot of the Vimalakirti Sutra, which is much more famous. Um, and so there's like a whole narrative, and the Vimalakirti Sutra is similar. It's got this narrative and then all this philosophy inside, but they've done plays on it at other Zen centers. And I was thinking, man, we should do an Empty Bowl play. And then reading these together, as I think Fushin was talking about, they feel like, actually, I don't think this assertion was made by Red Pine, but I think that they were like one sutra. Because what happens at the end of the Empty Bowl Sutra, when they go back to see the Buddha, he starts speaking in exactly that way, with that equation. This is called this, therefore, or this is not this, therefore it is called this. And then it ends with the 4-line stanza that is shared with the Diamond Sutra. It's almost as if the whole Diamond Sutra was lifted from that last page, and you could read it as one text. I mean, you could read it as one text, but I wonder, now I want to try doing it that way and seeing how that feels. And that's another thing that's so great about these texts and great books and texts in general, is you can read them over and over and over again, and it's not like you're done with it. It speaks to you in a new way every time. Yeah. So just briefly, the story, as Fushin was explaining or relating, it starts in the same way, in a similar way as the Diamond Sutra, which is where the Buddha takes his bowl and is going to go on alms round. But this time it's Manjushri. So Manjushri puts on his robe and takes his bowl and is going out. But another bodhisattva named Nagashri asks him, have you not gotten rid of your conception of food? So he's kind of like, I don't know, I can't help but read a sort of humor in all of this. Like that, I mean, here's these monks, these poor beggar monks that are going to go and beg for food in the city. And on the way, they're going to start having this debate, And Manjushri, of course, could just feel like, yeah, whatever, I'm going to go get my food. That's your concept. But Manjushri's like, And he's the one on our altar as the bodhisattva of wisdom with his sword, right? He's like, yeah, I'm ready for this. And so he launches into and I won't go into the philosophical. Fushin went into it a bit. I just want to kind of relate the story. So they have this fascinating dialogue about the emptiness of the concept of food, and therefore the emptiness of the concept of everything, of self, and so again, like the Diamond Sutra, but this one, just my opinion, is a little more interesting of how he talks about the different things that are empty. And Nagashri is playing the role of the interlocutor who's just kind of really sincere. It's like the sincere student who's asking, well, then what about this? And well, if that's so, then what about that? And they have this fascinating exchange. And there are points where Manjushri is basically just negating everything. Like, no, that's not it. No, and I mean, bodhisattvas realize enlightenment through non-attainment. Well, how did they realize non-attainment? Well, because non-attainment is unattainable. It's just kind of like this. It's just your mind is spinning, right? But then at a certain point, Nagashri's like, "Oh, how wonderful! You've spoken the great Dharma. I really get it." And Manjushri's like, how could you say that? That's nonsense. Like, if you got anything, then you're not getting it. He's like, well, then how can I get the not getting? Well, let me tell you. And then he goes on. And so it goes like this for a while, and they're just going back and forth. And then another bodhisattva kind of comes upon them. He's like, I'm amazed. You're speaking the wonderful Dharma. Like, what are you guys are talking about? Manjushi's like, if you think that anything wonderful is being said, then you're mistaken. This is all nonsense. And if you think it's other than make-believe people talking about make-believe things, then why would you think that's anything true? And he's like, exactly, that's powerful. Like, what I was so in. And so it just kind of goes like this. But there are moments when Manjushri kind of comes out and is like, well, what would you say? And then Nagashri gives an answer that's kind of similarly negating of things. And Manjushri's like, wonderful, you've got it. And he's like, what did I get? Nothing, you know? It's like, and so it's like they're playing off each other. It feels like play. And that's the kind of the part that I find so fun. They're playing in this field of concept, pointing out the non-conceptual nature of what they're really getting at. And so there's at another point, Nagashri says that he's experienced such insight that he no longer needs food, right? He says, today I have tasted the unsurpassed dharma of ocean samadhi. I no longer seek ordinary food. What I seek now are charity, morality, acceptance, devotion, meditation, wisdom, skillful means, and so forth, like all the factors of enlightenment. And you're like, oh, so is this really going to go so far that, you know, he's not going to eat, or are they going to bring it back home? And so in the midst of him saying, okay, I'm not going to go eat, then Subhuti arrives. So it's like, hey, we got to do this as a play. So it's like starts with two, and then another comes, and another comes. And this is where it gets really far out, because Subhuti comes, and Susintin Bodhisattva comes, and then one other one, Shariputra. And so kind of like some of the main characters from other sutras are showing up. And so Subhuti arrives and asks what they're discussing. And Manjushri, says like, well, we're not really talking about anything. How could illusions talk about anything? And Subhuti then just drops into samadhi. The samadhi of extinction. So he's completely gone. And then in the middle of that, Shariputra arrives and it's like, what's going on here? And Manjushri explains the various samadhis that Subhuti went through. So Subhuti went through like this samadhi, that samadhi, that samadhi, like all these different states. And then Shariputra hears all this and he drops into samadhi. So you got Manjushri kind of looking around and everybody's just like totally deep in samadhi. And you think that that would be the end, right? But no, Shariputra and Subhuti then arose from their samadhis and along with Manjushri, greeted the other bodhisattvas and entered the city to go on their alms rounds. So they kind of like had their thing, had their discussion, practiced together for who knows how long, timeless practice. And then, I mean, it couldn't have been that long because in the middle of the text before he was saying, it's almost time for, there's only a period of time we can go on alms round. I need to get going. And then they started talking about something else. So they're already late. So then they go in and then there's a whole nother kind of chapter to this where now we're with Subhuti. So Manjushri and Nagashri are off and everybody kind of goes around to different households. So they're not all begging from the same house. And so Subhuti encounters a lay woman who asks him for some reason, and this is something I'd like to look into more, why she's asking him if he understands the concept of food. Like maybe she was hearing the conversation. Do you understand the concept of food? And then he goes into speaking a little bit about emptiness and, there is food, there isn't food. And he's just standing there. And she's like, well, then if it's empty, with what hand will you get your food? And he kind of like puts out his hand. And then as she's about to put the food in his hand disappears. And she's like, now, how am I supposed to give you food? And he says, well, it's an illusory hand, an illusory food. How could you give me food? And then she kind of walks around him to see if he's holding his hand behind his back or something. And then he disappears and he's just gone. And then so the story goes, this causes an awakening in her. She's what they call stream entry. So she's like kind of like blown away to the extent that she wakes up. And then he then suddenly appears and congratulates her, like, you did great, wonderful. What did you experience? And she said, the emptiness of self. And, And so then she was overjoyed, offered Subhuti the food. He received it, he left and ate it. And so that's kind of what I wanted to get to, was that they do eat the food in the end. After all that talk, they still do the thing. And so then they go back to where the Buddha is and relate what happened. And he kind of praises them and says, all this, how wonderful, all these things you did. And he says that the view of the self that the laywoman renounced in her awakening was no view of self. Thus does the Tathagata speak of a view of self. And that's where it starts, that kind of, and he says a couple more like that before they go on to, they just quickly end that sutra and before it becomes the Diamond Sutra. And you can kind of imagine why it would be the same. So I'm just so grateful to Sensei Fushun for kind of rediscovering this book. One thing though, this is the kind of fun you have when you're just really geeking out, is I was reading the short, so this is Kanze's collection of short Prajnaparamita texts. And it's really interesting. It has these different recensions, the 500, the 300, the Heart Sutra on 25, the Heart Sutra on 18. And as I was kind of thumbing through it, reading these, I came across the questions of Nagashri. And I thought, no, yes, it's actually the text. So the questions of Nagashri, and to be fair, Red Pine said he was the first one to translate it to his knowledge into English in its entirety. This is only a kind of a short, like maybe a quarter of the full text, but it's really interesting to kind of look at and see, wow, this is a very different translation. And depending on how you're reading, it's going to be different. So most of what we have of Prajnaparamita is through Kanze. Of course, the Diamond Sutra has been translated so many times. But this is a fantastic, such a good way of it's a kind of very narrative form and very interesting, as I hope I conveyed the fun that they're having. And so as we read these, and what I wanted to do at the end and to really bring it home was to look at the Heart Sutra together, which we won't have time for. But just to say that the Heart Sutra, which we chant every week, if not every day, and we'll be chanting a lot during practice period. So most of us are probably quite familiar with the words there, and to a certain extent, the concepts. And it's said that sutra is a distillation of these larger texts, all the way up to the 100,000 line Prajnaparamita. So what does that mean? And as I was looking at this, it occurred to me that, so a distillation, you could say everything in the Heart Sutra, like the Heart Sutra contains everything that's in the bigger texts. And that's true, I think, the essence of it. But the more that you read the bigger texts, the more that you can read into, the more that you can see in the Heart Sutra, right? And so there are these, like we say, form is emptiness, emptiness is form. All these other things are also like that. And it actually goes into each thing and how it's empty and why it's empty. And so when you've read the kind of the bigger exposition about it and spent some time with it, then when you read, or when you chant form is emptiness and emptiness is form, it speaks to you, it can speak to you, in more depth. And then the same kind of feeling happens, I think, when we read the koans and then we read Dogen, and you see that Dogen is referencing the koans all the time. There's this total interconnectedness. And so it's just, as well, oh, I didn't read that koan, but there are koans where he talks about Prajnaparamita, and we can see the connection there. And so at Zen centers, of course, we love to talk about Dogen, Soto Zen centers, and the koans. But I think it really gives a lot of depth to that kind of study when we also spend some time in the sutras, which I'm just saying because I'd like to read more sutras, and if you want to join me, maybe we can do it together. Just to kind of conclude here, because the Heart Sutra is not the shortest sutra. The shortest sutra is the blessed perfection of wisdom, the mother of all Tathagatas, in one letter. Have you heard of this? The one-letter Heart Sutra. I mean, the one-letter Prajnaparamita Sutra. So all the way from 100,000 lines to one letter. And it's not just one letter. It's actually a story. It goes like this. Homage to the perfection of wisdom. Thus have I heard at one time. The Buddha dwelt at Rajagraha on Vulture Peak together with a large congregation of monks, with many hundreds of thousands of millions of billions of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Buddha addressed the Venerable Ananda and said, Ananda, do receive, for the sake of the weal and happiness of all beings, this perfection of wisdom in one letter, Ah. Thus spoke the Buddha. The Venerable Ananda, the large congregation of monks, the assembly of the bodhisattvas, and the whole world, with its gods, humans, asuras, and gandharvas, rejoiced at the teaching of the Buddha. So here's the Sanskrit. Ah. Ah. And then to really close, in the spirit of the Diamond Sutra and the Empty Bowl Sutra, both ending with the same poem, and in the spirit of that kind of reading over again these things that are really meaningful and beautiful, I'd like to read again Sensei Fushin's poem, The Clearing, which just, I said afterwards, I think my talk is just going to be about your poem. It could be, because it's such a beautiful expression, I think, of exactly what we're talking about. So here's The Clearing by Fushin. Please breathe it in with me. Between headlines and heartbeats, a clearing opens. While a world spins loud and unrelenting, suffering still singing an unbroken song, and in one deep breath, what we grasp as stone crumbles to sand through open fingers. What we name mountain softens, slipping away with the winter thaw. We stand like an oak with palms upturned, like unfurled ferns catching rainfall, chest exposed to a meadow of wildflower and thistle. Thoughts expanding like mist over the ground as first light breaks over the ridge and fog dissolves against tall pines, each appearing in its flawless moment, neither arriving nor departing. All of this is not separate from tending wounds, washing dishes, marching in streets, or sitting in silence. We discover the path, stepping stone by stone across turbulent waters, each foot placed precisely where water churns hardest around a rock. We move through thorned thickets without turning back or cutting down. How eagle and field mouse share the same land, or how frost cracks stone and makes soil. Something opens, not in searching or grasping, but in the stillness between breath in and breath out, when a hummingbird hovers fiercely without a sound before dipping into the flower's center, finding its own perfect clearing. Thank you all.